Hello and welcome to our webinar series. This week we're doing Getting Started Right with Microsoft Teams. My name is Craig Yellick. I'm the VP of Business Solutions here at BlueNet Inc. BlueNet delivers services across all three of these categories. Today's session focuses on initial deployment. BlueNet also delivers services across all three types of these solutions. Today's session covers information worker solutions. Teams is the future because Microsoft is totally committed to making it so. It is the fastest growing product ever produced by Microsoft. 500,000 unique companies with 13 million daily active users. My business partners and I just got back from the World Partner Conference, the Microsoft World Partner Conference they call Inspire. And every single keynote, for the first time in my history, and I've been to lots of these conferences, every single one of them referenced Teams. Some of the keynotes were focused almost exclusively on Teams. So for the first time ever, coming back from one of these conferences, I realized that my company is already totally aligned to deliver on this future. Normally we have to make investments in new technology. We have to do a lot of training. There's always something we've got to do to take advantage of whatever Microsoft is promoting for the future. And this time we are aligned to deliver on it. So I want to start off by getting a little background here about the attendees. Where are you with Teams right now? Can I get a show of hands of folks who are not using it at all at this point? Okay, welcome. You're in for a real treat. All right, show of hands. You're using it, but you know you're not using it effectively. Yeah, right. It's a little messy. I got it. Well, you're going to learn a lot here today, and you in particular are where the focus really is. All right, those of you using it and absolutely loving it. Okay, good. It's always good to get some positive feedback in these things. And then anybody using it but hate it. Okay, good. there's no haters. I have to share a quick anecdote here. I was out at a planning session about a month or two ago, and a C-level officer in the company, when the topic of Teams came up, had a very furrowed brow and said that they would not be using Teams. They've decided it was silly and a huge waste of time. And normally you don't disagree with the owners of businesses, in these sort of situations, but you just sort of let them have their opinions and work around them. But this was a case where I actually had to push back, and he was quite surprised that I was saying, look, we got to readdress this. You can't just not use Teams. Let's fix that problem. And in fact, that's what this solution briefing is all about today. It's to avoid that last experience. You used it and you hated it. All right, so BlueNet has assisted many customers with Teams rollouts. Unfortunately, we've also seen it done very poorly as well. So through our experience, we have 5 factors that we believe will make a successful Teams rollout. First of all, if you are an administrator or can get to your administrators, please turn off the ability for everybody in the organization to utilize Teams. It's just not a good idea. Total chaos ensues. I'll be talking more about that in a moment. So you want to start small and not roll it out to everybody all at once and then say, here you go, here's some tools, have some fun. Maybe some organizations have a culture where that works, but most people don't like the outcome. So pick one group, ideally a small group. Solve a business challenge. Get some enthusiastic early adopter type people who are not afraid of technology. Get them into a room, get a conference room and a whiteboard. Don't bring up Teams, all right? Don't go into a room and bring up Teams on the screen and try to figure out how to use it. Brainstorm collaboration, brainstorm communication problems, challenges, and then see about applying Teams functionality to solve that business challenge. That way, you've got people who can now evangelize about how great Teams is, and you'll have the more reluctant types of people who don't really have time to learn new technology. They'll be asking you, when do I get to do this? Rather than you pushing it on them and them making a mess. So how are you going to solve a business challenge using Teams if you are new to Teams? That's sort of a chicken and egg problem here, right? So somebody, and it might be just one person in a small organization, possibly a group in a larger organization, but somebody's got to be a champion. You got to learn features, experiment, make mistakes, read up on stuff, watch videos, attend solution briefings like this. And then once things are up and running, you've got to be willing to jump in and help people on demand. You have to be an advocate for success with this product because it doesn't happen by itself. You can't just throw somebody in Teams and hope they figure it out. Which brings us to the final point. You must establish mechanisms to monitor and listen. What's your experience been? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? You got to get there and mix it up. So user adoption and usage reporting is available in the Office 365 Administrator Portal. And you need to know how Teams is being used or possibly not used. And also bounce that off of other behaviors that are going on in the organization that you can use to demonstrate the business value of using Teams. And here are 3 examples that we use almost every rollout. We end up monitoring this, and then we can report to management some pretty major successes. So one is a dramatic reduction in internal email. What's wrong with email? Why would we want less of it? Right, that's sort of a trick question, right? Of course, nobody wants more email. All right, you ever get an email message that says, hey, do you have a second? And that email wasn't seen by the recipient for 2 days. What a useless message clogging up their inbox. You should have very fewer internal emails. What's wrong with long email threads? We want to make sure that email threads are rare. Threads happen when there's a reply to a reply to a reply to a reply to a reply. The message gets longer and longer and longer. Sometimes it wanders off track. Worse is when people get CC'd on these things or a new to gets added midway through. It's absolute chaos. It's very difficult to get any useful utility out of that, and it's particularly invisible to management. So if my team members in my SharePoint and Office development practice, if the team members of that team are emailing each other in long email threads, I can't participate in that. I can't monitor that. I can't benefit at all from that investment. So we want to make this rare. And then lastly, what's wrong with file attachments? Now, I know some of you attended our previous solution briefing on literally what's wrong with file attachments was the name of the briefing. We covered an entire session on this topic. So yeah, there's no benefit to attaching files to, especially internal email messages. And so I have an entire series of slides and discussions coming up about that. But a file attachment is no way to collaborate, especially internally. All right, so those are 3 measurements, and we typically make up a number of other ones when we do an engagement. All right, so if you're going to be the team's champion, here are the minimum features you should understand and be able to explain. And you should be able to explain this not just technically, operationally, how do I use a feature, but what's the business value to the organization for utilizing this feature. So first is the surface instant messaging functionality of one-on-one chat, just you and one other person, group chats where 2 or more people are involved in a chat, and then a formal group chatting mechanism called a channel. And we've got a whole bunch of slides devoted to this coming up, so I'm just going to leave that there. Next, @mentions and a thing called the activity feed. And the reason that these exist will become apparent as we go through the chat area. A lot of people get really turned off about Teams because they don't understand how to control the fire hose and make sure they're not missing out on key information. So we'll talk about that. Teams meetings rock. You must poke around, experiment, use Teams meetings. They are one of the biggest benefits that is going to make your life way more efficient and more effective for group collaboration by conducting your meetings, all of your meetings, in Teams. Teams has a file system behind the scenes, and so you can leverage this by storing files in the relevant Teams channels and even conversations. Chat can have files associated with it if that's suitable, and then link to these files. Don't ever send them as attachments. And then finally, learn how to use tabs. This is a mechanism for fine-tuning your experience when you're in Teams. The goal is to not keep leaving Teams to do something, then come back, leave it, come back. That's no way to collaborate and stay on top of things. You want to stay in Teams if possible. Tabs makes that possible. All right, so let's get started here with the instant messaging feature. If you are completely new to Teams, this is usually the first and possibly only feature you end up using. So I'm not going to illustrate any one-on-one chats because I think that's pretty straightforward. What I've got up on the screen here is a three-way communication between Brian, Zach, and myself. And this is a multi-day conversation that's been going on. It goes on sporadically. You can see that on the 29th and the 30th, late in the afternoon, early in the morning, it's all over the place. And it's a persistent chat. I can go back to this and review what we talked about and so on. So that's a sort of a one-on-one chat. I also have the ability to loop additional people into the chat, and we can even assign this a name. If this was an ad hoc chat that started off maybe just Brian and myself were talking, and Brian says, hey, I think we need Zach's input on this, we just loop Zach into the conversation. And if it dies after that, we don't use it any longer, that's fine. You can leave this conversation and pretend it never existed. However, if this one gets important, give it a name and manage it there. Noticed little colored Nichols names here. We set Zach red and Ben's yellow, and I'm green. That's pretty significant because this is a presence awareness functionality that is mostly on autopilot for Teams, but you are allowed to go up to your little icon in the upper right of the Teams window and drop that down and change your status to something else. Ideally, though, you let it run on autopilot and let Teams set those statuses. So how does it know, for example, that Brian is away? Well, away means that Brian is signed into Office 365 and is using a device or an app that is Teams aware, but he hasn't touched his mouse, his keyboard, he hasn't touched his phone in, I think it's 5 minutes. And so consequently, he's clearly not around. So if I were to send him a message right now, he's probably not going to see it. But we'll talk about later about how he can catch up with things that he might have missed if I decide to go ahead and send it anyway. Now, Zach has got a red light there, and that indicates that he's busy doing something. And in fact, right now at this moment, if you were to look at my team status, I'm presenting. And so I don't want people sending me messages. In fact, they're actually blocked. I won't get Teams messages right now because it would mess up my presentation. All right. Other availability gets changed by looking at your Outlook calendar. So if you have an out-of-office meeting scheduled, Teams will be aware of that and can help you manage that process. All right, so I mentioned that you can start with a one-on-one chat. You can loop other people in and make it a group chat, and you can even assign it a name if it becomes something that you want to persist over time. You shouldn't be doing that very often, though. The idea here in the teams and channels area is that we already have pre-formed groups that people belong to, whether it's formally or informally. You might be on the accounts payable staff. You might be in the sales and marketing staff formally as a business organizational process, or you could be informally put together. You might be the company annual meeting planning committee. That's not a formal thing. It's just 5 people that get together to plan the annual meeting. So the idea here is that when you stand up teams, everybody belongs to one global team. And here at BlueNet, it's called BlueNet Crew. So if you're a new hire, you are immediately a member of BlueNet Crew and can participate in the BlueNet Crew channel. All teams have a channel called General. From there, you can add as many channels as you desire, as long as they are relevant to the team, and you can create as many teams as you desire. So you can see here, we've got development teams, an owner's team, a management team, sales team, ops, engineering. You can create as many teams as you want. Within each team, there can be many channels. So here's an example where the sales team has a general thing called CSP sales opportunities into additional channels, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So this is how people get a first bad experience. If your office administrator does not turn off the ability for teams and channels to be created by everyone, you typically get total chaos. People name teams poorly, they name channels poorly, they create duplicate or overlapping teams and channels. That creates a lot of confusion and a lot of frustration. Now, if the administrator has turned off the ability to create additional teams and channels and only doles it out to a very small number of people, you tend to have people getting frustrated that there's just too much activity in every one of the teams and channels. So if we had nothing but BlueNet Crew in general, it would be complete disaster because there'd be way too much going on in there. But I've been in organizations with 100 teams and 1,000 channels, and nobody has any idea where anything is. That's also very frustrating. All right, so how do you manage chaos? Well, one thing you can do is hide either an entire team or one channel within a team. And here I have, in my particular area, there's 2 channels that I just don't really have any interest in. I don't participate in them very often, if ever. And I also have, it's not shown on the screenshot here, but I also have a number of teams that just don't interest me and I don't really want to deal with it. Worst case, you can leave the team and just say, look, I don't even ever want to ever be bothered by this thing again. I don't want it showing up in search. You can manage the chaos in that manner. Better is to diminish and then fully eliminate the chaos if that's possible. And so if you've got the people who are willing to do it, designate somebody, a team's librarian, and have them monitor, especially new teams. When a new team is stood up or a new channel is stood up, the team's librarian should try to curate the life or the early life of that thing. And so you see here that Kevin was in the opportunities channel of the sales team and said he's going to go grab lunch. He'll be back by 3 or so. That's not the right place. We're discussing sales opportunities here, not Kevin's schedule. And so there is a place for that. That's in our coverage in Outboard, in the general. And so, Zach, just a gentle reminder that you should put it somewhere else. And as long as this is done consistently and with a smile, you'll have a better experience. All right, so the command bar is something that every champion has to explore and really get to know the features and functionality here. The simplest way to use it is to simply start typing and see what pops up. So I'm looking for Matt And you see that I've got a hit on Matthew Stoltz, an employee here. I also get a hit on a guy named Matt Hackett, who I happen to have in my contacts list. So maybe I'm searching for him. And then we've got a whole bunch of places where apparently Matt Stoltz has been discussing. And so maybe I'm not really looking for just his name because I need to chat with him. Maybe I know that he was part of a team or part of an anonymous discussion or something. I knew he was part of it, I just can't find it. So this is how, when you're in a world with a large number of teams and channels, that you don't have to go rolling and scrolling looking for it. Another thing you can do in the command window is hit the / key, and then that's sort of like a shortcut to jump from where you are now to somewhere else. And a really good one to know is the unread activity. If you're know that you've been out of the office for a couple of hours and could have been 100 different chat messages that you might be interested in, unread just takes you right to them in a flat list rather than you having to poke all over the place looking for them. And there's a lot going on here, so you should really, as a product champion, you should be trying all of these and making sure that you're familiar with what's going on. All right, so that was a long list of chat-related functionality. Let's talk about how to keep up on top of all this activity. If you're a member of many teams and channels, there's no way you're going to be able to, and nor would you really want to, read and react to every single message as it appears. So if you suspect that a person that you're about to message might not see it, and the message is important, you can use the @mention feature to highlight that message for that individual. So here I want to make sure that Tim Kalinowski sees this message among all the other hundreds and hundreds of messages that are flying around today. I need Tim to notice this. So I type @, start typing his name, and as soon as Teams can narrow it down, it'll show me the individual. So I go and I click on his name and to select it, and now I can say, hey, Tim, I need help with this, and maybe mention 2 or 3 other people or what have you. And it's just part of the message stream now. When Tim, maybe he was away from his desk for an hour or 2, and so clearly didn't see this message where I'm asking him for help, he can go to his activity tab here, and the feed has a whole host of different filters, one of which is the mentions filter. So he can see all the places that he was mentioned. So again, this is just something as a product champion, you should be ready to demonstrate as soon as somebody raises an issue like, hey, I'm worried that I'm missing something, or how do I know that Tim's going to see this? You can jump up and be helpful. All right, so that's a lot about instant messaging. Let's move on. That's a topic that you should be very familiar with, but it's by no means the only feature in the product. So let's move on to other features to master. We probably should do a whole solution briefing on Teams meetings. It's sophisticated enough. It's got enough features that we could conceivably just focus a solution briefing on that. This thing's loaded with functionality, and a lot of it is not obvious when you first get started. If you just start hosting meetings, you might not even realize you're missing out on all sorts of stuff. So a couple of key things to know is, one is you can put the meeting as part of a team and a channel. So here I'm going to review some project status, and I want a history of this meeting. I want this meeting to be part of the channel for Power App development. And you've got your traditional stuff. Where are we going to meet? When do we want to start it, et cetera. Now, as soon as you fill in the start and end dates, you start inviting people to the meeting, and immediately we start getting free busy information. So we see Kevin is free at 2:30 on the 1st, Zach is not. So before hitting schedule on this, I know Zach's going to have a problem. So the scheduling assistant has identified, however, that some people are open at different time slots. So you just click on Scheduling Assistant and find out what subset of the attendees are available at any given time, and that way you can optimize who's going to be available. Now, maybe one of the reasons that Zach is busy is he might be out of the office and he's not going to be able to walk into the conference room. Well, one key thing, and it's indicated down here, is Teams are always online. Even though this is really a meeting invite to go to the conference room, it's still conducted in Teams. You should have the Teams window up on your presentation screen. People who bring laptops into the meeting room should bring them and use Teams during the meeting. Everybody can be online. So if Zach's out of the office for the day, he can still join the meeting. He can even join the meeting on the Teams phone app. So maybe he's busy because he's traveling. Well, you can go and fire that Teams meeting up. And now in Minnesota, he can't be touching the screen, but he certainly could turn the speakerphone on and participate in the meeting as he's driving along. Okay, Teams meetings have a screen share capability, so you can share the screen and so on. And you can also do recordings. And in fact, that's what I'm doing right now. This is a Teams meeting about Teams, very self-referential there. And I'm sharing the screen with the PowerPoint deck on it. And I'm recording this entire meeting. So people who missed the meeting can still be part of it. And most amazingly of all, Teams can generate a written transcript of this entire meeting. So if you've ever recorded a meeting, you know that nobody actually ever goes back and replays it, because it's tedious beyond belief to sit through a long meeting twice. Or if you didn't attend the meeting, to have to sit here and slowly watch a lot of irrelevant stuff flow by. So the written transcript allows you to skim, you can search for keywords, and you can zero in on the portion of the meeting that's actually the most relevant to you. So it's pretty amazing. You got to learn this technology. All right, I mentioned earlier in the metrics and measurement discussion that you should really be using links to files and never, ever, ever sending email attachments, especially internally. This is how it's done. Now, one really interesting thing about Teams is Teams are actually SharePoint sites. So if you put a file into a Teams channel file tab, it's actually a SharePoint document library behind the scenes. So all of the features and functions of SharePoint are already present here. It's just not obvious. So I can turn on versioning, I can check in, check out, I can share, I can do all the different things that you can do in a SharePoint document library right from here. So here I want to go and send somebody a link to the Procore demo spreadsheet, and I can go and get a link and then paste that into a chat window. I can paste it into an email message. I can make it a favorites in my browser, all sorts of things. Now, earlier I mentioned that there can be 40 teams. Legitimately, your organization could have 40 distinct teams. You're not part of all of them, but you could define 40. There could be 3 or 4, 5, 6 channels in every one of those. So there could be 200 file locations in your organization. This is another frustration point for people who start utilizing this as they go, I thought our local drive shares were a mess with all the folders and stuff, but this is flat. There's way too many places. Hit that slash, type files, and type a keyword. And here I have 2 hits on the word solution. And these are located in, well, they happen to be in the same channel and team, but even if the word solution was spread over half a dozen different teams and channels, you can search on keywords very quickly and zero in on them. So again, something to be aware of to prevent people from being frustrated that they take my advice, start using file links, and then can't find anything. All right, and then lastly, tabs. Tabs are created by pressing this little plus sign in the upper right corner, and this is what makes it possible to enhance and extend your Teams experience. When you click that button, up comes a list of literally hundreds of different tabs you can add to any channel. And the goal, and this is a stated goal of Microsoft, over time, they don't want you to leave Teams. They want you to stay in Teams, because Teams is the hub for collaboration. They want to stay in Teams. You get your work done in different tabs. So there's a couple that we use almost constantly when we roll these things out. One of them are SharePoint document libraries. Let's say that you are part of the sales team, and specifically you write quotes and proposals for customers. And that is a very carefully orchestrated process that's done in SharePoint. So there's some SharePoint document libraries with approval workflows and other collaboration tools that you've been using for years for that process. Microsoft doesn't want you to have to leave Teams where you're going to start missing messages and stuff. Go to SharePoint, work there, jump back over to Teams to chat with somebody, maybe to respond to a question, jump back. They don't want to back and forth. So you just go and add a SharePoint document library to your Teams experience. And now you can do your work like you used to, but still be able to collaborate and interact with other people. We can also put SharePoint web pages. So if there's a list that's associated with that proposal generation process, you can interact with that list right here inside of Teams. And then Planner, we do actually have a solution briefing coming up in the future about task management using Office 365, and Planner is one that I would recommend of all of these. Throw one of these up and start experimenting with it. Most teams who are collaborating end up assigning tasks to people and need follow-up. You need to assign due dates. You got to mark progress and so on. Planner is a way to integrate that planning task management directly inside of Teams, so your team doesn't leave Teams, yet is still keeping track of that business process through tasks and that sort of thing. Right, so there you have it. We've worked through the critical Teams functionality that every champion needs to know about. And I want to review quickly here the 5 main factors that we here at BlueNet have found to be critical to the success of a Teams rollout. Start small. Do not do a general rollout. Turn off the everybody creates until you've got some wins out there. Pick some small groups, solve their business challenges. You got to be a champion to do that. Somebody has to know how to solve problems with Teams, or you're going to have people trying to learn on the job. They're going to make a mess. They're going to get frustrated. And then you're not done just because you set up a bunch of teams and channels and people seem to be using it. Make sure you've got listening mechanisms so that you can continue to monitor and see if you're getting business value, and make sure that if there's problems developing, you can nip them in the bud, because this is the future. This is what Microsoft is pouring a lot of investment into, and you'll see that as the year goes by. All right, thank you for attending. We'll open this up to some questions and answers. Go ahead. Right, it's either, the question is how much does Teams cost? How do you license Teams? Teams is arguably free. If you have, for example, an E3 license, you get Teams as part of that. So if your organization has purchased Office 365 for many other purposes, say to get Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, etc., and you didn't buy it because of Teams, then you could argue that, hey, Teams is free, you should be using it. However, there are some license models that don't include Teams. And so if you were presently having an inexpensive, say a Business Essentials license, and you're enjoying a very low monthly per user fee for that, and you want to use Teams, then Teams would cost you whatever the cost differential is from the license you used to love and utilize to the one that you need to buy to use Teams. So most people don't consider this to be a very terribly big investment to get into. Yes, go ahead. Right, the question is, do you use Teams instead of SharePoint? Does SharePoint even have a role in your organization any longer? I hear this all the time, and the answer is that yes, you have multiple different use cases. Just because Teams is built on top of SharePoint doesn't mean that you don't also have a need to use SharePoint. This is a long discussion, so I'm going to make it really brief and simply say that SharePoint is the place to go for structured business processes, structured information that gives the users a very sort of curated experience. Information goes into SharePoint. It gets utilized in SharePoint for a very deliberate business process. Teams and the channels and the chat, as you see, are kind of chaotic. I use the word chaotic a lot when I'm talking about Teams, and that's just the nature of the beast. And so, do you want your entire world to always be structured? No. Are there processes that should be structured? Sure. So I don't see any reason to say it's all one or the other. Any else? Okay, yep. Okay, the question is permissions and security and so on. Yeah, right. Yeah, the owners. There is an owners channel where the owners of this business get together and chat about things. And absolutely, that is not something just anybody can stumble across. So you can have an open team and channel that anybody can join because they want to, or you can have channels that are strictly invite only. You can have teams that are invite only. And so when you're searching, it's all what's called security trimmed. So if I type /files budget, because I'm interested in what the capital budget is for 2020, I'm not going to be able to see it if I'm not a member of the channel where that file is stored. So that's true of, yes, absolutely. Conversations are private. If somebody searches on a @mention and yeah, exactly. You don't see anything that you don't have the rights to see. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Okay. The question is how much time should you budget for a rollout? Boy, I wish I could tell you that. We recommend doing it incrementally. The slides stress this many times. Don't do a monster rollout and think that you're going to plan this, in advance. Let this grow organically. We'll do engagements and say, hey, let's do a statement of work for, say, 40 hours. We're going to make sure that you get so many teams and channels stood up. We're going to have some, training and mentoring of champions. We're going to do some envisioning and some solution design sessions. So after the 40 hours, are we done? Man, a lot of times, sure. A lot of times it doesn't even take 40 hours. Other times after the initial investment, the organization realizes that, wow, we got a long way to go here. We got to think harder about this. All of that is better than just letting her rip. All right, well, I'm going to end this and say thank you. And if you want to stick around, and I know there's some more questions and stuff, we'll hang around for as long as anybody needs to hang around. So thank you so much.